Thank you all for coming and for spending your morning, afternoon, evening with me today. Today we're going to be talking about metrics in application security and how you can set up effective metrics to help track your security program. Just some housekeeping things. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please just put them in the chat. I'll try my best to monitor it, but I'll do Q&A at the end where I'll go through everything if I can't get to it or I miss it at some point during the presentation. Or if there's any burning questions you have after this conversation, feel free to reach out to me. I'm in the Semgrep community Slack. Just find Milan, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to answer any questions there. With that, we'll be right on time. So let's get things started. In case you don't know who I am Milan Williams. I am a senior product manager at Semgrep. And I've spent the time on this talk because I spent the last 12 months interviewing 50 different application security leaders to understand how they quantify security and risk in their business. This webinar is essentially the culmination of everything I've learned throughout all of those conversations, and it's my best attempt at trying to collate that into something that I think throughout the industry we can all try to use and learn from. One of the biggest themes that I found when I was asking leaders about what's their biggest challenge was really just being able to quantify a lot of the work that they do. A lot of teams already feel underwater, and it can be really difficult, or even more difficult, to feel that other people in the organization don't even understand all of the work that you do on a day-to-day basis. And metrics, I think, can become the unifying language that everyone speaks to be able to articulate the value you're providing to the business, advocate for more resources to your team, and maybe even be used in your next promotion. So there's a lot of good reasons to track what you do. And these are kind of my best proposal at what I think can help the industry overall. Cool. Let's talk about Semgrep. So in case you haven't heard of Semgrep before, Semgrep is the application security platform for secure guardrails. We are the complete platform for SAST, static application security testing, SCA, software composition analysis, or supply chain security, and secrets detection. We're your one-stop shop for everything you need as an AppSec engineer. One of the things that makes us unique in the industry is that we are transparent. You can see the underlying source code for every single security check that Semgrep runs. It's customizable, so you can change and modify what rules are run, where they're run, and what gets shown to your engineering team. And they're extensible, so you can build your own checks, you can fork, customize any of the things that we provide out of the box, so you can tailor your security needs to your security program. Semgrep open source is where we started, and it's where we powered over 10 million scans every single month, and we're used by really great organizations like Snowflake, Lyft, Figma, all of whom, and some of them might be in this call right now, as well as some top tier investors, including Lightspeed, Sequoia, Redpoint, and many others. That's a bit about Semgrep. With that, I wanted to take a step back and talk about the problem, or why metrics have become such a focus point of the security conversation, especially in recent years. I think the problem is pretty clear to everybody. Security leaders are flooded with data. I was reading a Forbes study from earlier this year where the average security team has 45 different tools that they're trying to manage. And that just is an incredible amount of tool sprawl where you're going to have so much data in so many different places. And so it becomes really difficult to figure out what are the data points that matter, what are the business metrics that matter, where do I focus my time when you're just flooded with all of that information. If anyone in the listening wants to throw in the chat how many tools that they have, I would be very curious to see. I think this number is like golf, where the lower the better, but I'm curious if anybody can beat the 45 or is hopefully somewhere far, far below it. Countless. Oh no, that's not good. So yeah, so trying to just consolidate on fewer and fewer tools is the name of the game. And so what does this look like in practice? That often creates a feeling where there's too much to do with too little time to do it all. You have, it usually starts where you have tool X produces thousands and thousands of findings. You have a dashboard that looks like this on the left, where you show a huge amount of alerts and you don't know where to focus your time. Great, that's already a really difficult challenge. typically security teams are under-resourced. When I talk to most teams, they're looking at a ratio of 1 or 2 security engineers to 100 developers or maybe more. So what do? You try to surface as much as you can to your engineering team of all these alerts. There's more of them than there are of you. So that's your best route to try to get some of these things fixed. But engineers who don't have all the security context, are not experts by any means in what security is, they become overwhelmed. There's too many security tickets. They can't figure out what signal from what's the noise. Many alerts don't take into account things like business context or runtime risk. So it's really difficult to understand, is this real or is this not? How do they prioritize? What just winds up happening is that all of the security tickets become noise and there's no feedback loop to show them what matters. Even for the few engineers that do become security champions or are just good Samaritans and want to do their best to fix security issues, it's really difficult for them to see the ultimate impact of the work and time that they put into because there's no metrics or no way to understand if what they fix actually moved the overall security needle for their organization. Okay, so that's the developer problem. Security engineer turns the other way and says, okay, let me try to convince my executives that I have too many alerts and I need more resources. Sometimes security teams face executives who don't care about things like vuln counts or 100 findings versus 1,000 findings versus 1,000,000 findings. Like they don't know how to wrap their minds around that. They only want to know, are we at risk or are we not? And that's a really difficult question to answer in security for a lot of reasons. But just a simple number like how many vulnerabilities we have isn't enough to really answer that kind of complicated question, or even more complex, like how much money are we saving with having this tool in place? And so what this creates is a really sad AppSec engineer where their development teams are overwhelmed and disengaged. Their executives don't understand the importance of advocating for more resources to their team. And they're stuck with a tool that really nobody uses and a bunch of metrics that people aren't excited about. If you repeat that over and over a couple times, you create we call it like the AppSec doom loop, but a really tough situation where you see things like burnout and really other things that are common in our industry. And this isn't good for anybody. So while this is a bit of a dramatic, I'm sure people have different experiences depending on their tools. You can see if you take this to an extreme, it creates for a really difficult position for security teams and the work they have to do on a day-to-day basis. And so I wanted to share a couple quotes that I heard from people in the industry, from interviews, all anonymized, from people that I spoke with that I thought were interesting to share with this group. I'm curious if anyone feels the same. They can share it in the chat. So one quote I heard was, every team reports on different things. There's no single source of truth and no consistent way to track progress over time. This is from an AppSec manager I spoke with at a financial institution where they felt like there were just so many tools. It made it really hard to create a single pane of glass or a really unified story to anybody else that wasn't on the security team or anybody that didn't have a grasp or login to all of those different tools. The other quote I got was, right now, I spend more time making spreadsheets than solving problems. I feel like you can swing the other way where you say, okay, I want to try to build out this single source of truth for everybody to have some set of agreed upon metrics. But doing this is really hard. Oftentimes the data isn't very clean. So you spend a lot of time making pivot tables in Excel or maybe something more sophisticated than that. But a lot of time making these really complex spreadsheets and less time actually moving your security forward. And then the last one, which I liked the most of all these quotes, was somebody who said, I honestly thought I had the right metrics in place. They thought they had the right system, but I know they aren't working because I can't advocate for the resources I need. And this came from an understaffed security engineer in the space. I thought this was really powerful because they actually did the right thing. They had metrics in place. They were tracking what they were able to do, but they weren't able to turn those metrics into change in their organization. I think that's another symptom or sign that things aren't working. So if any of those relate to you or you feel like there's something you felt at any point in time, hopefully some of the suggestions I have in the rest of this talk will mean something to you. Now let's stop talking about the doom and gloom of everything that's going wrong in the metrics industry right now. Let's talk about the positive. So, what do the people wish they had if they could have their ideal setup when it comes to application security metrics? So, the what I heard after talking with all of these folks, it generally fell into two main categories. One, which I'm calling like stop the bleeding, or tell me what are the top 5 things I need to do today. These are metrics that are, I'll talk more about them, but are metrics that are useful to figure out what's going on. I call them like diagnostic metrics, like you would in a healthcare setting. These are the things to help you know right now in an emergency how things are going. And the second set of metrics kind of fell into like a longer term impact or overall health indicators. Essentially, how is the health of my security program improved over the last 12 months? So two kind of groups, a today and then a tomorrow is where I generally felt people needed. And I think where people struggled is sometimes folks had one or the other. Most of the times folks had some version of, okay, what am I doing today? But then it became really difficult to tell the longer term impact story once you've been in a role for 6 months, 12 months, 2 years to say, how is the work that I've been doing day in and day out? How has that actually improved my security program over time? And so the metrics that I propose kind of fall into these two categories. So let's start with the very first one. So first metric here, this is pretty basic, pretty standard, but I call it the production backlog, or how many vulnerabilities are in production today. This is a stop the bleeding metric for sure. The best time to use this kind of a metric is really on first days. I find most people have something like this in place already, but use it when they've started a new job, or are inheriting a new code base, or maybe have an acquisition, a new company coming in, and they just want to understand what is the security posture of the existing organization today. So any kind of first, you want to understand the production backlog. Most security scanners will provide this kind of thing out of the box. At least they really should. If they're not, we should definitely talk. You should look at Semgrep. But most will provide this kind of thing out of the box, so you can get a good sense of how many vulnerabilities are in production. This is what it looks like when you look at this over time, where you can track. This is what it looks like in Semgrep, but you can see over time, week by week, you can see how many findings are sitting in your backlog, how many things are sitting in production, and you can start to track with relatively good accuracy how well you're doing in production. And of course, you want to see this number slowly go down over time, or at least stay steady, so you know that you're making good progress on your production backlog. Next up here, I want to talk about hotspots. So the next level up from what you understand what's happening today, the next thing is starting to group metrics into applications, services, or business units, depends on the kind of nomenclature of your organization. But once you have a sense of these repositories can group up into an application or service, which applications actually pose the most risk to my organization? I think this one is interesting about when you can use it. I was speaking with somebody in the industry about this recently as a way to use hotspot metrics as a way to garner competition within your organization. They said something which really stuck out to me, which was most folks in senior leadership are there because they have a bit of a competitive edge to them. And so as a security team, why not use that to your advantage when you're setting up metrics? So nobody wants to be at the top of the leaderboard when it comes to like which application is the most vulnerable. And so if you can aggregate all of your metrics in that way where you can say, hey, this business unit is looking a little bit worse than this one, that you can spark some of that competitive edge in your organization to start to move some of these metrics down. I know I, for example, would be very motivated to get myself off that leaderboard. It's also a really great tool to advocate for additional resources. So if you want to look and understand like, hey, here's where the biggest risk is in my business. And as a team, we want to drive down the risk within a certain area of your business. This is a great tool to be able to advocate for additional resources because you're starting to speak more of the language of the business. You're not just talking about individual vulnerability counts, but you're able to talk about higher level groupings. So in Semgrep, what this looks like is you're able to see the most number of findings by project. You can also do this by, again, higher level groupings like by tags or by business units. But this is just an example here where you can see this, these are sample applications. But you can see this Java app here has the highest number of vulnerabilities out of anyone in this list. It has the most critical vulnerabilities as well. So you can flag that as a hotspot, or this is where you want to pose the most risk. This is also helpful to me where you have very limited resources. Like I mentioned at the beginning, most application security teams are very, very outnumbered by the amount of code that's getting generated, by the amount of engineers on their team. And so this is a really great way for you to focus your time and focus on the things that matter the most to your business, where you're not trying to like boil the whole ocean at once of like trying to fix everything, but really, really being very surgical about focusing on this specific area because you know this is what's going to drive the most risk down based on what's most important. All right, so that's hotspots. That's number 2 on our list here for metrics to talk about. The next one, number 3, is compliance. The definition here is not just the thing you have to do, but if you take it a step further, it's really about are you within your remediation SLAs? Usually for SOC 2, for PCI compliance, insert your favorite compliance standard here, you'll have some requirements for how quickly you have to fix certain high, critical, et cetera, vulnerabilities, 30, 60, 90 days, maybe even shorter than that, depending on your industry. This is kind of the floor. This is the lower bound for whatever you need to do within your organization. I didn't put this first because in the list here because every organization is going to have different compliance needs, and honestly, like I mentioned, compliance is usually the floor for where you want to be. It's the lower bound of what you want to do in your organization. That was a big theme I heard from all the security teams, that most compliance standards aren't enough. Just because you're in compliance doesn't mean you're not at risk. But it's good to keep your eye on, because if you get outside of this kind of bounding box, that's even more important that you want to make sure you get that fixed as soon as possible. When to use this one, it's really to be reviewed on a regular cadence, usually whatever cadence you have your SLA around. So if it's 30 days, I'd check it every 30 days or so and make sure that you're still within your compliance standard. I think the biggest tip that I got from talking with folks in the industry was to always have proactive alerting in place if you are nearing that SLA. Maybe it's obvious to folks, but I think you'd be surprised how many people I speak with who didn't even realize they'd breached an SLA until after it had happened, versus if they could have had some level of proactive alerting in place where, hey, this critical vulnerability hasn't been resolved and it's been 28 out of the 30 days, that could have saved them a lot of headache later down the line when it came to having to justify that ultimate breach to various teams within their organization. And so what this looks like in practice, so within Semgrep, we track things like the median open age or the mean time to resolution, MTTR, to be able to track how long your critical, high, and medium vulnerabilities are open for. This is a really great way for you to be able to track this over time and be able to ultimately, again, burn this down over time. Usually teams will have some kind of goal metrics based off their compliance standards for every severity category. So this is a way you can make sure you're not creeping too high up and leaving anything open for too long. All right. I'll move on here to our next one here. So once you've got the stop the bleeding, I would say the first 2, production backlog, your compliance standards, those really fall into the stop the bleeding category, where it's all about how can we make sure that we are preventing or how can we make sure that we are have a good picture of what's happening today in my industry. These next 2 metrics are really focused on a more long-term perspective. Once you've been in an organization for a while, potentially for multiple years, how do you actually know if you're able to improve the overall security health of your organization? I think burn down was a really great one that I heard from many leaders about a great language they're able to use to convince people for what these vulnerabilities are. So this one burn down is how many vulnerabilities are new in your organization versus how many are fixed. And I think this one makes the most sense once you see the visual, to be honest. So I'm just going to cut to that. So let's look at this one here. I'm going to spend a bit of time on the slide because I think it's important to break down what's happening. So again, we've got our week over week tracking. We can see what's going on every single week. This one, you can see in blue on the top, you're able to see, okay, how much is new? So how many new vulnerabilities are being detected every single week by XYZ security scanner? And then below the line here, we're able to track how many have been fixed and how many have been ignored or marked safe to ignore. And this, I think of it as like a golden ratio, honestly, is what security teams are trying to balance as much as possible. Ideally, over time, you're able to see less and less sitting in your backlog that has never been fixed than what's coming new, or as new code's getting generated, you're not continuing. And over time, you start to get to a much better place, like in the bottom right here, where a lot less new is coming in to your code base, and slowly over time, more and more is getting fixed. And then there's a nice graph here where you can track the net change. But I think this starts to get to, again, another higher level order of what metrics you want to be able to track to be able to understand the success of your security program. Oh, and I saw a question in the chat. Do you have out-of-the-box templates like Power BI for these metrics? I can share with you the definitions for all of these. All of these are also calculated within Semgrep, so you can use that as your kind of baseline for calculating these. And in our documentation lists how we've detailed out the calculation. Is there an out-of-the-box metrics tool that will ingest all the findings from all security tools? Oh, that's a good question. Semgrep hosts this for all of ours, but we also provide APIs, so you can calculate all of the metrics that I showed you today based off of our API as well. So two routes. I'll talk briefly about this last metric here. I think this is, while the most ambitious, I think this fell most strongly in where I want to be as a security team than necessarily where we are today. I think that it is by far the most powerful tool you have to be able to build security champions within engineering and convince your executives of the ROI of your program. And the simple definition here is just how many vulnerabilities did we prevent from ever hitting production? I think a lot of times in security, we focus a lot on like what's in production, what's happening today, which is really important. Again, it's what we're all responsible for. It's where today's risk lies. But I think in order for us to graduate as an industry, we have to get out of the reactive mindset. Way easier said than done. But I think that is where I think we all know we have to go. And I heard that a lot from folks. And so prevention metrics, I think, are the first step to be able to start to track this. Historically, prevention, like I show here, is mainly confined to FANG or really well-resourced companies where they had the time, the resources, the effort to be able to compute these kinds of prevention metrics. Semgrep and many other tools in the space have made this a lot easier, where we're now able to actually accurately track how many issues we've caught earlier in the development process and how well shift left as an idea has actually moved in the industry. Things like how many vulnerabilities did you catch in your pull request, in your PR comments? How many vulnerabilities were detected in your IDE? Those are all questions that were really, really difficult to answer not that long ago, but I think in recent years, tools have made this quite a bit easier. And so what does prevention look like in practice, or how many issues we prevented from hitting production? I like this two-pronged view of how metrics look like when it comes to prevention metrics. There's one I have here, which is around adoption, or what percent of everything that we found in the last month was ever shown to an engineer directly. And I think this is really powerful for security teams who are trying to get out of the whack-a-mole mindset, where it's difficult to actually shift things left if developers aren't seeing the majority of issues. There's a lot of reasons why this is hard. You're worried about noise, you're worried about disrupting their development flow, all very valid reasons to want to limit what you show developers. But I think the more that you can feel confident showing directly to engineers, the less pressure you can put on yourself to triage and be in the loop for every single vulnerability that's found. You just can't physically scale yourself that way. Um, and so this first metric of everything that my security scanner found, how many of those were found a step earlier in the process, or how many of those were actually shown pre-production? And then to kind of dovetail nicely with this one, of the things that were shown in production, so say you had 100 issues, you showed 50 of them to engineers pre-production, that's a huge win. How many of those are actually fixed? Did engineers just ignore all of them? Did they fix them? Did they leave them open? This gives you a really good view into what your actual developer engagement is. So if you do shift left, you can feel confident that you're understanding that, hey, most of these things are actually getting fixed by engineers, or they're not, they're getting ignored. And you can deep dive into all of these charts to figure out what findings are being ignored so you can learn about why. And I think this combination together is a really powerful story to start to talk about prevention, because you're able to get out of this, again, very reactive mindset and shift more into proactive and setting up a healthy security program for the long term, which I think what we're all trying to do. And I'll add one last bonus bit on here when it comes to prevention. So I think one of the interesting things about talking with people about prevention metrics is that they're often one of the easiest metrics to translate into business value for your executive team. So one very concrete example that I've done with many security teams now is doing an ROI analysis on their vulnerabilities they've detected. For example, in Q1, the AppSec prevention tactics at this organization identified and caught 10 critical SQL injections pre-production. All of these were caught in their pull requests. We have all the data and the line numbers to show exactly where we caught this. Then you can look on something like HackerOne or your past bug bounties to say, okay, what's the average payout if this had made it all the way into production? How much would we have had to pay someone to find this vulnerability if it had reached production? This only accounts for the kind of bug bounty payout. That doesn't even include the actual risk that it could have caused your organization, depending on what business data that SQL injection an attacker could have accessed. But let's just focus just on the bug bounty payout that you would have had to pay to identify this SQL injection otherwise. HackerOne says it's about $3,000. That's the lower bound for critical SQL injection. Then you can turn that into very simple math of 10 times 3,000. That would have saved your team $30,000 in one quarter by having this kind of prevention system in place. And so while I have this in the case of Semgrep, where we do constantly check things pre-production, you can take this in any kind of setup. Say you have a secure code review, or you're looking at an early architecture diagram of a new feature. Any time where you can articulate, hey, I actually caught this thing earlier, there's a really nice mathematical story of like, hey, if we pretended that this actually did go out to production, how much would this have cost the business? And there's a really nice argument for how much actual dollars you've saved your organization because of the work you put in. And I found dollars is the language that everybody in the business speaks. That's the saying, right? So I think this has been a really powerful tool where developers, engineers, executives, and the security team can all start to speak the same language, and all get credit for the really hard work that they're doing, which is the important part. All right, we're getting to the last mile here. I just wanted to summarize everything that we've talked about. So key takeaways, what are the 5 key metrics that are important for security leadership? Tracking your production backlog. This is standard in most tools today, but if you don't have it and you're just going off of pen tests and vibes, we should talk. You should check out Semgrep. The next one is hotspots, or trying to identify what are the highest risk areas to your organization, moving away from raw vulnerability counts to broader business units. The next one is compliance, looking at are you within your SLA standards? Are you getting your most critical vulnerabilities fixed within the proper time period? Looking at your burn down to see how many vulnerabilities are getting introduced new into your organization versus how many are getting fixed, and ideally decreasing that over time. And then lastly, looking at prevention to see how many vulnerabilities did you actually prevent from hitting production and using those preventative stats to turn that into dollars saved for your organization. That is all I've got for you all today. If you have any resources, you want to play around with this yourself, you can sign up for Semgrep and join the community if you have any questions. If you want to reach out to me personally, you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm just Milan Williams at Semgrep, pretty easy to find. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about metrics or just generally what it's like to be running an application security program these days. Cool. Thank you all for your time. I'll stick around for a few minutes if you have any questions. But if not, have a great day.